It was a chilly winter evening, and I found myself alone in our old creaky house. My parents had gone away for the weekend, leaving me with strict instructions to take care of the place. I'd always been a bit uneasy when left home alone, especially at night, but I convinced myself that I could handle it. The house itself had always given me an eerie feeling, with its dark wood-paneled walls and antique furniture. It was as if the history of the place seeped into every nook and cranny, creating an atmosphere that was both oppressive and unsettling. That night, I decided to keep myself occupied by watching movies in the living room. I snuggled up on the couch, wrapped in a warm blanket, and tried to lose myself in the world of cinema. The sound of the wind howling outside added an eerie backdrop to the movie's suspenseful soundtrack. As the hours passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see a shadowy figure lurking in the corners of the room. Each time I turned, there was nothing there, but the unease continued to grow. Eventually, I decided to take a break from the movies and make some hot cocoa in the kitchen. As I stood by the stove, waiting for the milk to heat, I heard a faint rhythmic tapping coming from upstairs. It was as if someone was gently tapping their fingers on the walls. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I was alone in the house and there was no logical explanation for the sound. My mind raced, trying to dismiss it as a mere coincidence, but the tapping continued, growing louder and more insistent. With trembling hands, I turned off the stove and slowly made my way up the creaky staircase. Each step felt like an eternity, the tapping growing louder with every footfall. It was coming from my parents' bedroom. As I reached the top of the stairs, I hesitated for a moment before pushing open the door to their room. The sight that greeted me made my blood run cold. Standing at the window, bathed in the pale moonlight, was a figure. It was tall and slender, with long, dark hair cascading down its back. The tapping had stopped and the room was filled with an eerie silence. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I was paralyzed by fear as I watched the figure turn to face me. Its eyes were hollow and empty, and its lips curled into a grotesque smile. I felt a rush of terror like I'd never experienced before. In that moment, I knew I had to get out of the house. I turned and sprinted down the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear the figure following me, its footsteps echoing in the darkness. I burst out of the front door, not bothering to grab my coat or shoes. I ran through the snow-covered yard, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't stop until I reached a neighbor's house and pounded on the door, begging for help. The police were called, and they searched the house thoroughly, but there was no sign of the intruder. My parents rushed back home, and they were as baffled as I was by the bizarre and terrifying encounter. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house had been violated by an unseen presence. We decided to sell the old place and move away, hoping to leave the unsettling memories behind. To this day, I can't explain who or what I encountered that night. It was a true, disturbing Home Alone horror story that continues to haunt my dreams. I've never been able to shake the feeling that whatever it was, it still lingers in the shadows, waiting for its next opportunity to make itself known.
I had always enjoyed the solitude of being home alone. It gave me the freedom to do whatever I pleased without anyone to judge or bother me. But that one night, when the line between reality and nightmare blurred, I discovered the true terror that can lurk in the shadows of an empty house. My husband had left for a work trip, leaving me behind in our cozy 2-story home. The first night passed without incident. I binged on my favorite movies and enjoyed the peaceful stillness of the house. However, as the second night approached, an eerie feeling began to settle in. It was as if the house itself had come alive with a malevolent presence. I brushed off my unease as mere nerves, convincing myself that I was being paranoid. But as darkness fell and the house grew quieter, the feeling of being watched intensified. I decided to distract myself by reading a book, hoping it would help me forget my irrational fears. I curled up on the living room couch with a novel and tried to lose myself in its pages. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner echoed through the room, counting off the seconds of my solitude. It was a comforting sound, a reminder of the familiar. Around midnight, Just as I was beginning to feel more at ease, I heard a faint noise coming from upstairs. It was like a soft, barely audible whisper. I froze, straining my ears to listen. The whisper turned into a low, rhythmic murmur, like a conversation happening just beyond my reach. I knew I was alone in the house, and the realization sent a chill down my spine. I summoned every ounce of courage I had and slowly ascended the staircase. As I reached the landing, the voices grew clearer, yet no words were discernible. The source of the sound became apparent when I stepped into our guest bedroom that was unoccupied. There, sitting on the edge of their bed, was a figure shrouded in darkness. It had its back to me, and its head was bowed as if engaged in an intense conversation with someone invisible. I stood there, frozen in shock, as the figure continued to murmur incomprehensible words. The room felt icy cold, and I could see my breath misting in the air. I couldn't bring myself to move or make a sound. Seconds stretched into minutes, and just when I felt I couldn't bear the tension any longer, the figure suddenly fell silent. Slowly, it turned its head to look at me, and my heart stopped in my chest. Its face was shrouded in darkness, hidden by the inky blackness of its surroundings. But its eyes, two glimmering orbs of malevolence, pierced through the shadows. They bore into me with an intensity that sent a jolt of fear coursing through my veins. Before I could react, the figure stood up and began to glide toward me, its movements eerily graceful. Panic surged through me, and I turned to flee, stumbling down the staircase in a desperate bid to escape. As I reached the ground floor, I heard the soft, haunting laughter of the figure behind me. It echoed through the house, filling every corner with its chilling mirth. I burst out of the front door and into the cool night air, my heart pounding like a drum, and called the police. I decided to stay with our neighbors next door until we could figure out what had happened. The officers arrived shortly afterward and searched the house, but they found no trace of the intruder. In the weeks that followed, we had the house blessed by a priest, hoping it would cleanse it of the malevolent presence that had haunted us. I couldn't shake the feeling that the intruder had left something behind, something that lingered in the shadows. To this day, I still can't explain what I encountered in that house during those 2 nights of terror. I can't erase the memory of those glimmering, malevolent eyes or the haunting laughter that echoed through the darkness, and I can't escape the chilling realization that, in the world of Home Alone horror stories, sometimes the terror is all too real.
It was a dark and stormy night when I found myself home alone in a house with a chilling history. My parents had reluctantly agreed to house sit for a wealthy friend who owned a sprawling mansion on the outskirts of town. They assured me that I would be fine on my own for a few days, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The mansion itself was an imposing structure, a relic of a bygone era. Its high ceilings, ornate chandeliers, and antique furniture gave it an eerie grandeur. But it was the stories that surrounded the house that sent shivers down my spine. The mansion had earned a sinister reputation in the town. Decades ago, it had been the scene of a gruesome murder. A wealthy family had been brutally slaughtered in their sleep, their bodies left to rot in the house for weeks before anyone had discovered them. The case had remained unsolved, and the house had stood empty ever since, plagued by rumors of hauntings and curses. As the storm raged outside, I decided to distract myself by exploring the mansion. I wandered through its dimly lit hallways, the creaking of the wooden floors echoing in the silence. Every room seemed to have a story, and I couldn't help but feel that I was not alone. It wasn't long before I stumbled upon a locked door at the end of a narrow corridor. Curiosity got the better of me, and I set to work trying to pick the lock. After several failed attempts, the door finally swung open, revealing a room unlike any other in the mansion. The room was small and cramped, its walls adorned with strange symbols and faded photographs. In the center of the room stood an ornate mirror, its glass cloudy and cracked. It looked out of place amidst the grandeur of the mansion. As I approached the mirror, my reflection seemed distorted, my features twisted and contorted. A sense of unease washed over me, and I quickly turned away, feeling as though I was being watched. I left the room and continued my exploration of the mansion, but the feeling of being watched never left me. It was as if the very walls of the house had eyes that followed my every move. I couldn't shake the sensation that something sinister lurked in the shadows. As night fell, I decided to retreat to my room, hoping to find some solace in sleep. But as I lay in bed, I heard faint whispers in the darkness. They were like the murmurs of 100 voices, all speaking at once, their words incomprehensible. I tried to dismiss the sounds as mere figments of my imagination, but they grew louder and more insistent. It was as if the very walls of the mansion were speaking to me, revealing the secrets they had long held. Unable to bear it any longer, I rushed out of my room and into the hallway, determined to leave the mansion behind. But as I reached the top of the staircase, I was met with a horrifying sight. The mirror from the locked room had somehow moved to the top of the staircase, blocking my path. Its glass was no longer cloudy and cracked. Instead, it was clear and reflective, like a portal to another world. And within its depths, I saw something that sent terror coursing through my veins. In the mirror, I saw a scene from the past, the gruesome murder that had taken place in the mansion decades ago. I watched in horror as the family was slaughtered in their sleep, their faces contorted in agony. The scene played out before me, each detail etched into my memory. I stumbled back, unable to tear my eyes away from the horrifying spectacle. It was as if the mirror was showing me the truth, the dark secret that the mansion had long kept hidden. Desperate to escape, I turned and fled down the hallway, the whispers growing louder with each step. I reached the front door and threw it open, the storm outside now a raging tempest. As I stepped out into the night, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. The mansion and its dark secrets were behind me, and I was free at last. But as I turned to look back at the house, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The mirror, now shattered and broken, lay on the ground just inside the doorway, and within its shards, I saw the faces of the murdered family, their eyes filled with accusation and anger. I knew then that the mansion's dark secret would never truly be buried, that it would continue to haunt anyone who dared to enter its walls. And as I walked away from the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that the spirits of the past were still watching, still waiting to reveal their gruesome story to the next unsuspecting visitor.
It was a cold winter night, and my parents had left me home alone for the weekend. They were attending a family gathering out of town and had assured me that I was old enough to take care of myself. I had always enjoyed the solitude of our cozy suburban home, but little did I know that this particular night would turn into a nightmare. The house was nestled at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, surrounded by tall, shadowy trees that rustled in the brisk wind. The neighborhood had a sense of tranquility, and I felt safe within its familiar confines. That night, I decided to make the most of my solitude by watching movies and eating junk food. As the hours passed, I lost track of time, engrossed in a particularly suspenseful thriller. The movie's eerie soundtrack and the howling wind outside created the perfect ambiance for a night of spine-tingling entertainment. It was around midnight when I finally decided to pause the movie and head to the kitchen for a snack. The house was dark, except for the soft glow of the TV in the living room. I made my way to the kitchen, my footsteps echoing in the silence. Just as I reached for a bag of chips, I heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible sound that sent a shiver down my spine. It was the doorbell. My heart skipped a beat as I wondered who could be visiting at this hour. I cautiously made my way to the front door, my footsteps barely making a sound on the carpeted floor. The door had a small window at E-level, and I peered through it, my breath catching in my throat. There, standing on the dimly lit porch, was a figure shrouded in darkness. I couldn't make out any features, but the silhouette seemed strangely elongated and unnatural. My initial thought was that it must be a Freean playing a prank on me, but something about the figure's posture sent a chill down my spine. I hesitated, debating whether to open the door or ignore the visitor. As I watched, the figure reached out and pressed the doorbell again, the sound echoing through the house like a sinister chimney. Summoning my courage, I unlocked the door and slowly swung it open. The porch light flickered, casting an eerie glow on the visitor's face. What I saw made my blood run cold. The visitor had no face. Where there should have been eyes, a nose, and a mouth, there was only a smooth, featureless expanse of skin. It was as if someone had taken a porcelain mask and stretched it over their head. I stumbled back in shock, unable to tear my eyes away from the grotesque sight before me. The figure remained silent, its featureless face turned toward me as if it were studying me. My instincts screamed at me to slam the door shut and lock it, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed by fear, my mind unable to comprehend the nightmare unfolding before me. Suddenly, the figure raised a long bony finger and pointed it at me. Its gesture was slow and deliberate, and as it did so, a voice whispered in the depths of my mind. A voice that was neither human nor animal, but something altogether otherworldly. "Come with me," the voice whispered. its words sending a jolt of terror through me. Without thinking, I slammed the door shut and locked it, my heart racing. The figure on the porch continued to stand there, its featureless face turned toward me. It made no move to force its way inside, but its very presence filled me with dread. I rushed to the phone and called the police, my voice trembling as I tried to explain the bizarre and horrifying encounter. They assured me that an officer would be dispatched to my location immediately. As I waited for the police to arrive, I heard the figure on the porch whispering in that unearthly voice, its words growing louder and more insistent. It was as if it were trying to compel me to open the door and step outside. When the police finally arrived, they found no trace of the mysterious figure on the porch. They searched the area but came up empty-handed. They suggested that it might have been a prank or a hallucination brought on by stress. But I knew what I had seen, and I knew that it was something beyond explanation. The encounter haunted my dreams for weeks afterward, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the featureless figure was still out there, lurking in the darkness, waiting for its next opportunity to ring the doorbell and beckon me into the abyss.